Okay, so this is my spoiler review of the whole season of The Haunting of Bly Manor. I will be breaking down each and every episode, and please note, do not watch any of this review until you finish the season as a whole, because I'll try to be connecting certain dots between episodes. And having watched the season now twice, you catch a lot more, so I'll try to show you what I've found. In the meantime, you can watch my spoiler-free review, which I'll link in the description if you have not watched the whole season. So, if there was one show I was most excited for this year, it was The Haunting of Bly Manor. I absolutely love The Haunting of Hill House for so many reasons. You can check out my reviews of the whole season of The Haunting of Hill House. I'll also link down below. So knowing that the showrunner is the same showrunner in Mike Flanagan, that gave me a lot of faith. But you have to realize here he only writes and directs the first episode. So it's going to have that huge struggle that most season 2s of shows have to overcome, where, like in Westworld, where you don't have the main showrunner on board writing, directing every episode. So you're spreading the ball out. Whereas in season 1, of course, Mike Flanagan did every single episode. So like Haunting of Hill House was, this season was based off old novels, and this is based off a lot of the work of Henry James. And the name of our main character, Danny Clayton, comes as an homage to Jack Clayton, who directed the 1961 movie The Innocents, which is based off Henry James's main work, Turn of the Screw, which a lot of this is based off of. So also be aware, on my first watch of this whole season, I was incredibly disappointed and felt like something was seriously off. But on my second watch, I ended up loving this. So you'll see in detail why that is and where I think they really hit well and where they dropped the ball a bit. So episode 1 is the episode that's directed by Mike Flanagan and written by Mike Flanagan. What you have to get used to right away as a Haunting of Hill House fan jumping into this, being this is an anthology series, you're going to see a lot of similar actors here. But I was surprised that episode 1 wasn't character-centered on one person. We're used to, with Hill House, most of the episodes are directly focused on one character, where in Bly Manor, you do see that, but they're mostly half episodes that are centered on a character, and then it goes back to the main story, and some episodes where it's not at all, which this would be the case in episode 1. So it's interesting when we open up this episode, because what's crazy is you see it's Carla Gugino, who was not in any of the trailers and who was totally under wraps about her even being in the show or who she was playing. This was a huge secret. I mean, we couldn't even mention her name in the spoiler-free review. And when you watch the second time, it's crazy watching this episode, because you see they open with the shot of, now we know this is Jamie, waiting for Danny to come through the door. And she actually looks over her shoulder, because remember, the show ends with Danny's hand on her shoulder, and she looks there like she felt something. Really crazy how well that tied around. And again, on second watch, you appreciate it more, because you see at this wedding dinner rehearsal, now knowing who each character really is. Whereas on first watch, you're kind of like, what the hell is going on? And you'll first hear the song O Willow Waly here, which will play throughout the show, which just works so well, and is that bass right here of Jamie with the waiting for your lover to return to me. But it's interesting, Flora, older here, mentions that they're getting married in this house that's supposedly haunted and used to be a covenant. And she's like, oh, I wonder if a crazy nun will show up. So I wonder if it's a hint towards where season 3 might go in this whole universe of The Haunting. So we see who we know is Jamie, played by Carla Gugino. Her older self has people huddled up and is about to tell the story, which is the show that we're about to watch. Now, to clear something up in confusion, seeing the versions of Owen and Henry Wingrave and Jamie here, they're not ghosts. This is really those people, but when she's telling the story that Flora is hearing, you're visioning these people as who they are in the story, and she's probably giving them different names, so Flora doesn't fully connect all the dots. And that, yeah, those are really the people we're seeing in real time, but in the story, you're getting like the story faces of them, why it's different actors. And we'll see this story, The Haunting of Bly Manor, takes place in London in 1987. We see Victoria Pedretti here as our lead, as Danny Clayton. And you got to get used to now, there's a narration in this season, which Carla Gugino will do brilliantly. But at points it does feel a little bit like something you'd watch on PBS or BBC with a Lord Henry Wingrave in need of an au pair, where it works well still, but I actually think it makes it a little sleepy time in certain episodes, which I'll address. So episode 1 wasn't the best. I mean, there's some super talky scenes and a lot of exposition going on. It's a little overdrive of it, especially the scene where Henry Wingrave is catching up Danny Clayton about what happened to the kids, and they're kind of doing a lot of telling here. And one of Flanagan's rare weaknesses is he does a lot of telling and not showing. A little too much, which can make it feel very slow at points. But man, he has such a special eye with that camera. You just see the difference in quality of the camera work in episode 1 compared to the others. He's a pro at using rack focus, his establishing shots are beautiful, and he sneaks in a couple awesome split diopter shots that no one else even attempts in this whole season. Like the shot he has of Danny in the center, and then it's blurred to the left, and then to the right is Flora in the background playing with her dollhouse. So cool. And you even see that here with Hannah with her candles and Danny in the background. And man, Flora is adorable. Just her saying this line perfectly splendid. It gives you a lot of awe moments. She's a great actress, and you see that with Miles is a great actor here. That's something Flanagan always nails, is he doesn't have a bad actor on set, and the casting is spot on. And this is again why it's so important to watch this a second time to really enjoy it way more on second watch. Just because like in this episode when Danny Clayton first arrives to Bly Manor, you're seeing Hannah looking at her dead body in the well, and right after Peter, as Miles, just pushed her in there. And now Miles is back where Peter just left his body. So it's crazy seeing that again in that moment in the first episode. And now knowing what's really happening. And you get hints right away that Hannah is a ghost from the start. I mean, she's not drinking anything. She won't eat anything. No one's actually physically touching her, or their hand would have went through her. And I love right away they're messing with you with Flora just kind of looking off to the side multiple times while talking to Danny, talking to ghosts, which we can now assume is Rebecca and Peter. And it's cool on rewatch because then you can kind of put the pieces together of who it is and what they were trying to accomplish with Flora in a given scene. And when we first get a look into Flora's dollhouse, what's really cool is you're seeing in this episode all of the ghosts you are going to see in the black and white episode 8. From the lady in the lake to the doctor, everyone, and it's all through Flora's eyes. She's seen all these ghosts in the house. And I like they start to sprinkle in mysteries like the random phone calls. We'll know later on it's Mr. Wingrave, but here you don't know yet. What I did think fell a little flat was this don't go in the old wing here. Felt a lot like don't go in the red room in Haunting of Hill House. And that's also a little complaint I have, that as good as this is, it does feel a little too familiar that it's another haunted house story, which I was hoping it wouldn't be because it was just last season in an anthology being that same kind of theme and looking so similar, the interior especially. I wasn't so crazy about that. Even though it was so well done again, it just feels a little too soon. But the actress of Hannah here already stands out as a bright spot of the season. Tania Miller, she is so good in such a challenging role. But even her monologue here catching us up now about Rebecca and the parents, again, feels a lot of telly. It's really long. And I feel like they can chop these monologues down a little bit. And then Danny kind of goofily gets trapped in the closet, R. Kelly style here. It doesn't end on that effective bang that season 1 did in episode 1 with Steven Sees a Ghost, where he sees Nell to kind of hook you in. Kind of leaves you at a like, okay. So overall, this wasn't one of the best episodes. Visually, it was stunning because, again, it's Mike Flanagan, but wasn't one of my favorites of the season. I'm giving this one a 7.9. But each episode, I will give a spooky rating as well and how scary it was. And I'm giving this one a 2 for the mirror jump scare in the closet, but not much else. And you'll see as the season goes on, one of my surprises here and disappointments was how not scary season 2 was. But we'll delve more into that. So we'll see episode 2 is written by another Flanagan in James Flanagan, who's been an actor and crew on other works of Mike Flanagan, but this is actually his first writing spot, and he does a great job. And this episode is directed by Ciarán Foy. This is a more character-centered episode, and like I said, it's more half of the episode than the full episode, but this is Miles' episode. And we'll see it shows us Miles when he went after his parents died to this Catholic boarding school. And you see Miles has a lot of important lines when he's talking to this priest. And when the priest tells him a story from the Bible, Miles responds to it saying, "Did demons need permission to enter the man?" And the priest explains the man let them in and that there is evil out there and that it's a choice and we are not compelled. However, in the case of Miles and Peter, this is not the case because Miles doesn't have a choice letting Peter in. And Peter just does it so many times without him approving. And the priest here will talk about how animals are the innocent ones, like the dove in the classroom, but Miles is like, then it wasn't fair what Jesus did to the pigs. And in the case with Miles and Peter, maybe Miles, knowing Peter jumps into him at a point, acts as the innocent animal here because he is a kid, doesn't know better. This will also connect to Peter's story because when we'll see Peter trapped in hell in that memory he had that was awful, he talks about how He was innocent as a kid when bad things were happening around him and to him, but as an adult, you can't use that as an excuse anymore. You're not innocent, and we're totally going to delve into that. But Miles took a lot from Peter and learned a lot from him as almost a fatherly figure after his father died about this finding people's keys. And it's almost Peter's lesson to Miles in being manipulative and how to get what you want in life. And Miles, learning from this, jumps from a tree. Then he even knows the only way he's going to have this priest stop defending him to others is do the worst thing he can do to this priest by killing his dove and trying to convince the priest he's actually bad. And he even uses the priest's own words against him, saying, "We are not compelled," saying, "I'm bad and I chose to do this." And he's like, "I'm sorry, I didn't do worse." And he even apologizes to the father after saying, "I need to find your key. I'm sorry." So he's doing what he learned from Peter. And again, right now, as a kid, he's innocent in doing this. He's just doing what he believes will get him back to Flora. So he has good intentions. And it's tricky on first watch because you see Miles as a real jerk in present timeline. So you're like, oh, this is explaining why he's a bad kid. But it's more than that on second watch because you know Peter took over his body. It's actually kind of showing you this episode. At the end of the day, Miles was a good kid, especially with the cards he was dealt with his parents. And how someone in Peter who had also awful cards dealt with his parents grew up to be a choosingly bad person at the end of the day. Where we see Miles at the end of this show seems like a good person as an adult. But again, halfway through this episode, we cut back to the present timeline. So we see this panic attack Danny has when she sees Flora bring out who we know now is her dead fiance's glasses. This will also lead to the first moment that Jamie comforts Danny. So this sets up a lot because it sets up their relationship in many ways. And Danny, this is almost like her mental illness where she gets haunted by stuff and it appears to her. This is set up really well because in her life here, it's the haunting of her dead fiance, her guilt of possibly feeling like she was part of the cause of that happening because she just dumped him, and her struggle with her sexuality. But it's setting up what you can look as her mental illness in being that this will eventually be the Lady of the Lake who haunts her and keeps coming up as visions. And it sets up Jamie to be this comfort to her and that loves her through this and knows what's going on and is there for her. So you get really good payoff with the two of them in their relationship. And you get some more crazy hints here about Hannah being a ghost and that she's time looping because she starts seeing cracks in the wall. This crack is the crack she saw in the well, her last moment when she died. And you see Jamie doesn't see these cracks. And you see already on second watch, Miles' behavior of Peter in his body already started early. You're seeing it here in this episode with Danny when he's like pulling her hair creepily behind her ear. You saw it when he was snooping on Danny in episode 1 and he says these adult lines like children could be draining. And it actually gets confirmed if you caught it in this episode that Peter's going through his body because they have this fun hide and seek game they do here. It kept you on edge as the audience. It was spooky. But on hindsight, on second watch, you watch it and you see that Danny sees Peter outside the window, runs outside to him, and then inside we see Miles isn't feeling good and falls down. And this was Peter leaving his body. I also love in this game of hide and seek the moment we saw from the trailer where Flora tells the ghost of Perdita to shush while she's singing A Willow Waly. And I love how they have the ghost singing A Willow Waly in this show. And this was the first moment we heard that. So creepy. I really wanted more of this, to be honest, though. It's few and far between, this kind of creepiness and dark scenes like this. But this was the first episode I really liked in the season. I'm giving this one a 9. And the spook level is a 3. Still low, but at least the hide and seek sequence had you on edge a bit. But no real jumps getting you. Nothing too disturbing. I think the scariest part was the heads turning in the basement of the dolls a bit. That was eerie. So episode 3 is written by Diane Edumu-John and again directed by Ciarán Foy. Now this first half is the Peter Quint episode, and there's a second part to Peter Quint's story, which we'll see later in the season. And it's also our intro to Rebecca Jessel. So we go back a year, and you see this is Rebecca's first interview with Henry Wingrave for the nanny job, or au pair as we say in the show. And you see Peter has an eye for her right away. And in Flora's case now, the motherly influence in her life was Rebecca, and that's where she got the perfectly splendid from. And one of the most adorable Flora scenes was when she had all the hot chocolate around her mouth and she's yelling at Hannah for not drinking hers and like, give me yours. Another hint again, just showing you Hannah's a ghost. And it's so interesting that the character of Owen makes the guess that those calls coming into the house is Peter hoping Rebecca will pick up. It's a close guess, but it's actually, we know, Henry Wingrave, hoping that Charlotte picks up. This is a great misdirect. So you see, with Peter and Rebecca's relationship starting to form here, Peter was trying to pull out of Rebecca their both frustration of being lower class and wanting to break through that wall that's hard to break through and get in that rich boys club, they call it. And Peter will literally do anything to break through that, where Rebecca has a more strategic approach but still moral approach. Also, the chemistry was off the charts between Oliver Jackson Cohen and Tahira Sharif. I actually wish we had more Rebecca in the show and that she even got her own episode. Would have liked to know more of her story. So we get some interesting lines here with Jamie to Danny where she's talking about Peter and Rebecca's relationship when we're back in present day. And she's like, the wrong kind of love can F you up, make you do really stupid things. So many people mix up love and possession. And he didn't just trap her, he trapped himself. But Danny's like, I don't think that's possible, love and ownership. But it gets a little heavy-handed here again when I'm talking about a lot of telling. And it gets a little over sappy, which Flanagan can do. And it feels a little bit like Seventh Heaven in an already very slow episode. So that was kind of frustrating. Felt like the pace needed to pick up here. I love they threw in this line though with Miles to Hannah saying, I had a bad dream and I hurt you and it makes me feel sad. Again, showing you Miles at the end of the day is a good kid and that he subconsciously is aware of something going on and that he's getting visions of him as Peter killing Hannah. And you see how insanely jealous Peter is with Rebecca and how crappy of a person he can be. And he at one point leaves literally the kids not watched like he says they are just to bang Jessa in the West Wing. And you see how they set up here too how much Peter has always hated Hannah, that Hannah respected the rules of the house and Mr. Wingrave, and Peter hated Hannah for this and was always in his way. So just giving you a scene that's again a prime example of how good this can be on second watch is when Miles and Flora do a story time here for everybody. Miles here is Peter, and he's actually telling the story of his father. And he's talking about all these 20 children in the house that he was molesting. It has so much more weight knowing this is Peter saying this and what's actually happening and he's talking about. And he's talking about how when the dad came back and they were all laughing at him, but then he hurt them. And just shout out to the actor of Miles here, playing Peter as Miles, just crushes the body movements of Oliver Jackson Cohen to a T. I don't know where they find these actors, but they're all good. And you see Danny's first hand grab here of Jamie, and what happens is she turns around and sees her fiance who died because this is the guilt getting triggered of, again, feeling like she's betraying her dead fiance and her struggle with her sexuality. So this episode I'm giving an 8.7, decent, and a really low spook level at like a 1. And that 1 is just for the jump scare at the end. So another episode I wasn't too crazy about was actually episode 4. This was written by Laurie Penny and directed by Liam Gavin. Half of this episode was the Danny-centered episode, her backstory. You see she was childhood sweethearts with her fiance. And you see her mother-in-law was giving her this dress to wear that she had, and this really scared Danny off about the marriage. But every time you'll see she has a moment with Jamie in present time, and the dead fiance appears, the jump scares here were just, the timing was off. They weren't working. Just not great. It wasn't scaring you. But again, lines you see on second watch that mean so much more. You see Flora talking to Danny here in present time at the grave. And she's like, her dead parents, I'm telling you, they're not here. I've looked and looked. Obviously means more than you think because they didn't die at Bly Manor. So that's why she's talking about she's not seeing their ghosts. Where Danny's just thinking about she's just talking about it metaphorically here. We also see that gravestone of Viola Lloyd in the church that Flora is scribbling, and we know who that is, being the lady in the lake. And more hints about Hannah being a ghost and kind of time hopping is that Owen's mother died of dementia, comes back from the funeral, and Flora's like to Hannah, how'd you know to make Owen's favorite dish? How'd you know he was coming? So there you go on that. And in Danny's flashback, I love the little details, again, of the hint of the struggle of her sexuality. Like you could see kind of turned on just when the girl who's fitting her wedding dress, she feels something from her just touching her. She likes it. And when we go back to present time, I do really like this monologue here of Flora to Owen, comforting him and saying, that feeling of sadness after losing someone means you're alive, and that dead doesn't mean gone, so you don't need to be sad, which we'll hear a lot. This dead doesn't mean gone throughout this show. And another scene where Miles is clearly Peter, where he's flipping out of the table wanting some wine. Again, this actor killing it. And big hint here about someone coming in and out of Miles's body too is after this whole blow up at dinner, when she goes to talk to him about this, he's like, what are you talking about? And there is a good moment here about Danny talking how you lose your parents, but he's got this silver lining of it where he gets to choose the adults in his life. I like that a lot, and that Danny could relate to it. But in this flashback, what really didn't work for me was when she calls it off with her fiance and they have this fight and they're in the car and then he gets hit by a truck. That is so overused, and you could see coming a mile away. What I did like, though, is that scene was in a similar car and similar street and lighting as the Nell and Luke scene when they were in a car in Bent Neck Lady. But it was almost a little comical here when she was screaming at him getting hit by the truck. You could have just thought of a way cooler, clever way of how he died. But there was some good editing in this episode, in particular some great match cuts, like the pool of blood going to spilt wine. But again, there's some overused mush in this episode, especially Jamie's monologue around the fire about bonfires and old bones. And then Owen has one. It's a lot of sap overload. Feels a little bit like filler. So it's interesting looking back at Hannah lighting her candles. The 4 candles she lights are for Mr. and Mrs. Wingrave, who passed, Owen's mother, and Rebecca. A 5th candle, we'll learn, is lit by Charlotte for Hannah's husband who was cheating. But I do really like here that Danny has a moment with Jamie and opens up to her about she sees her fiance and sees things and how Jamie's so understanding of this, and that's going to be important as the relationship goes on in life. And you see here Danny almost gets through a full kiss here, but still fiance appears, so she's not there yet with Jamie and getting over and letting go of her past. And that's what's so cool they do with Danny compared to Peter and Viola, is that theme of being able to let go and not be stubborn and holding on to make you do crazy things. That's the difference of Danny's character and her good. And it's crazy sad watching this over, seeing Owen talking to Hannah and talking about going to Paris and living life together. He doesn't realize he's talking to a ghost of Hannah. But we do also get confirmed here that the dolls in Flora's house move on their own, because Flora can see through the dollhouse when Danny left her room. And she can also see in the dollhouse when the lady from the lake is entering the house. And you see Flora and Miles ran to Danny because they knew what happened to Peter from the Lady in the Lake and were protecting her and saved her here, which comes full circle because Danny will end up saving Flora. And Flora was actually distracting Danny from the Lady in the Lake by saying and making up she was having some kind of nightmare, which she wasn't. And little details, I love when Danny puts Flora to bed after this and says, "It's okay, there's nothing to be scared of," but Flora looks at the dollhouse just to check the Lady of the Lake is gone. But you'll see there's a big moment with Danny burning the glasses of her fiance here in the fire. This is the start of her letting go of this and what happened, facing her fears. But as a whole, I wasn't crazy about the flashback story being underwhelming here with her and her fiance. And again, some oversap around the bonfire. But I like the scenes here with Flora and Miles with Danny. Giving this episode an 8.2. We'll give it a spook level of 3. Just because it's a little creepy and on edge here with the Lady in the Lake entering the house. So let's go to episode 5 now. This is written by Angela Lamanna, directed by Liam Gavin. This is the Hannah episode, and this was my favorite episode. This episode felt the most level of Hill House Gold. Thematically and keeping you on the edge of your seat, so much is going on here. And you see Owen here basically talking about dementia to Hannah, saying we can't count on the past. We think we have it trapped in our memories, but memories fade or are wrong. We can die at any moment. Or we can forget our entire lives, which is like dying. So this is bleak. This is some dark stuff, heavy stuff, but it works so well with the dementia here with his mom going to what Hannah's experiencing. And the horror of this episode is watching her getting tucked away at such a rapid pace. Us seeing she's a ghost, but it's really a play on the horror of dementia and losing your memory. And it's also throwing in this tragic love story of Owen and Hannah and really seeing what could have been, which gets payoff later in the season. And it's such a tribute to the actress of Hannah. She just absolutely kills it here. You really feel when she's just screaming at one point, just at her frustration at what's happening. And I'm talking about that horror, that same effect of someone losing their memory. And I love the wardrobe changes of Hannah to show difference in time and difference where she is. And I love they throw in her neck hurting because we know she snapped her neck. And she's reliving her pre-death memories and seeing these moments that Peter was in Miles and being a jerk to other people. And she'll even now go into memories and experience memories of Rebecca's and Peter's. And what really worked well and a tribute to the actor of Owen is Owen sitting down the day that Hannah interviewed him. And she loved this moment meeting him. But remember that this Owen is a part of Hannah's memory and imagination, and it's really Hannah talking as Owen to herself. It's a very Inception-like episode. It's a lot. And it definitely deserves even 3 watches. And I love how they edited this. I love how they had, at one point, Owen look at the camera, but really he's Hannah yelling at Miles leading to that scene. So you know it's all from Hannah's brain, which was just insane. You just see like Miles as Peter throughout this episode, just smoking even with the lighter. And they do a good job character writing, even for the smaller character here in Charlotte, because Charlotte had this moment with Hannah saying like, I lit this candle, basically saying your husband should be dead to you for cheating, and that she's saying that marriage is like blind faith. And it makes sense for Charlotte's character so well, because Charlotte would be having an affair with her husband herself because he wasn't around. But you see then the complete opposite coin, which is Becca, because Becca has the opposite issue where has blind loyalty in a sense, and Hannah's even kind of calling her out on this, where she just loves no matter what the flaws, talking about Peter. She's scared of Peter, but it's exciting and fun, she says. So you see those two different types of women that Hannah's kind of reacting to, and maybe Hannah's somewhere in the middle. And I love that she opens this church door and she sees the well here that she dies in. So cool. And some of the best writing here was the glue trap monologue about Peter, and that Rebecca, when she realizes she's stuck, it will be too late, and which is a huge theme of this episode. And Owen's great line in Hannah's memory as saying, does a mouse know when it's already over? Do we? And saying denial. So this is that feeling again of Hill House level good. Just stuff that hits you in the core and scares you in that sense when you even think about it. It's just true psychological horrors. And I'm sure this hit close to home for a lot of people. And we'll see she sees now through Peter's memories his own death in the house from the Lady of the Lake, and her seeing his own realization that he's dead and how he died. It's crazy, again, like Inception here. And I love here when Hannah turns and sees dead Becca in the lake, that next snap sound effect was perfect. And it's so exciting, the writing here, where he's like, Owen saying to Hannah in her memory, Peter is missing, and you think, but you know deep down he's dead, and that something is wrong with Miles. And Miles, this was his best scene as Peter when he is pushing her down the well, right when she connects the dots that he's dead Peter. And like I said, it's crazy how it connects to the scene in episode 1, and that is when Danny first got to Bly Manor at that moment. And where it really connects again to this theme of Dimension, how sad this is and hard to watch, is how powerful it is her saying her name to herself and what year it is at the end of this episode, Hannah. And it's just this trapped ghost here in her memories. Whew. So this one for me was a masterpiece. This is a 10. Again, like I said, Hill House level, Bent Neck Lady level, which has always been my favorite episode of this series. This was the best of the season, and it gets a spook level of 10 because it's the horror in your soul here, in your mind. It's too close to real life and not knowing when you're gone or trapped. So episode 6 is written by Rebecca Klingel. This is directed by Yolanda Ramke and Ben Howling. So what's crazy about all this is that, as I said, episode 5 was my favorite of the season. Episode 6 by far was my least favorite, and I will say is the worst episode of the Haunting series as a whole. This was the Henry Wingrave episode and the Henry Thomas the actor episode, who I love. But what they did here was they took a character from Henry James's work, the grinning doppelganger character. Oh my God. Him seeing himself with the grinning was so corny and cheesy and did not translate well to TV and today. Also, this episode could have been trimmed so much. I don't know why this episode was one of the longer of the season, hitting at about 107. But what I did like about this episode is the backstory on what happened with this love triangle of Henry, his brother, and Charlotte, and this reveal that Flora is his baby. I also like the scenes of Flora getting the Hannah treatment here, and we're seeing her tucking away now. But you see with Henry how much he neglects Miles and Flora and only would come to see them if they were like dying. And you see the guilt for Henry is that he's his own worst enemy with this grinning doppelganger, denial about his brother being truly dead. But why this episode I do not like has my least favorite scene in it, and that's not even with Henry here, it's with Jamie's 7-minute monologue. I timed it in the garden talking about the Moonflower to Danny. Holy cow. This works in a book, but you know what? Visually, in a show, this does not. This is way, and maybe in a play even, fine. But this is way too long, and it's a momentum killer in the season. Being in the middle of the season, where someone might be even on the fence of the show so far, and then you throw this here, is something that will tune people out and is a criminal mistake. I mean, Jesus, even Victoria Pedretti here looks like she struggled even listening and keeping a straight face during this. I mean, I was watching this and then watching on second watch thinking, oh my God, knowing that everyone at this party in current day in the beginning, listening to Carlo Gugino, they're probably like, kill me. Can you imagine listening to that part in a circle? Oh my God. It's the criminal mistake of the all telling and no showing here, even talking about the coal mines and a little bit of her backstory. I mean, that might be the blind spot here of the whole series, that Jamie's such a significant character, especially to Danny, our protagonist, our main character, and she could have used a backstory episode or some scenes of her backstory, not this monologue to make up for it. I mean, Jesus, we got the Hallmark Channel for this. We don't need it here. I will say that's one of Mike Flanagan's blind spots as a showrunner. He did this with Hill House because I have to say, there's a lot of directors who are guilty of this and writers, but Flanagan, I think, has this blind spot where I love him as a writer and director. But when I listened to the commentary on Hill House he was saying in so many of the episodes, oh, I wish I had this scene in, because there's like extra features showing you the episode longer. And the whole time I'm watching it, I'm like, no, I'm happy he cut it out. But he's the one kind of constantly complaining, like, it really needed this and it really helps with the backstory. And I think he has that blind spot of, like, not seeing when he needs to chop some stuff out. And a lot of directors have this issue. Unpopular opinion, but I would say that with Quentin Tarantino's recent work with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where you kind of get in your own head and you need someone to kind of tell you, like, yeah, you need to trim some of this out, dude. Not everything is essential and amazing and necessary. In contrast, I did love the scene again with Charlotte and her husband and him connecting the dots about the affair and Flora. And he's saying how it took him 6 years to do the math or want to even do the math. But some really on-the-nose writing here where the brother now goes to see Henry in the past when he figured it all out. And he literally says, you have to live with yourself. And he is a grinning monster. Oof. Oh my God, and at one point, the grinning doppelganger of Henry even grins at the camera. Good God. But another nice touch in, again, the flashbacks is when the mom gave Flora the talisman before she would go on her trip to India, saying it would protect her, and how that worked well, and how that just shows you, damn, the mom got rid of that, and then she goes and dies. So this episode for me, I'm giving it a 6.8, spook level of 3 for the faceless doll popping up. But this was the first clunker in this series of The Haunting as a whole. And I would say only clunker. But that's going to happen when you hit a season 2. It's so hard to hit all episodes to be good as time goes on. So episode 7 is written by the Clarkson twins and directed by Yolanda Romke and Ben Howling. This was what I was talking about, where it's like Pete's second half of his backstory episode. And my God, Oliver Jackson Cohen is ace. This dude is A++ actor. I know he was cast in Invisible Man, but he's criminally undercasted still. I mean, I don't think you can do his scenes better. And props to him, because he's got these very heavy emotional moments where he feels like he's trapped in hell in this worst memory with his mother. He keeps this Scottish accent and doesn't break it in the high emotions, where what frustrates me is even actresses like Nicole Kidman, a lot of times when they're doing an accent, in high emotional moments, they break, they slip up, they don't realize it. But he does not at all. But this was really effective to see him trapped in his own hell. And I love the line where she's like, where else would you be? And him realizing who he is as a man and how he was innocent as a child, like I was saying, and now he wasn't. My only confusion to this, though, was, yes, we get the reveal about his father basically being a pedophile, and his mother was okay with this, didn't do anything about it. I was just a little confused about where he felt guilt for helping his mother here, giving him money. But was she a drug addict coming out of the hospital saying she was cured? Or was this something to do with her also having a thing for kids? I'm not so sure that was totally clear. And what it directly would lead to. Because yes, she was with the father. The father was the one, like he said, shaking him down using the mother. But what did it lead to? Did it lead to more acts of pedophilia? I was confused by this. Maybe someone down below can clear it up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I kept rewatching it and it just wasn't clicking to me. But I like the explanation here about Rebecca's final days and being really betrayed by Peter. And I didn't even catch this on first watch, how when she walked into the lake, that was Peter inside of her. And it was against her own will. And this is the manipulative Peter who acts just like Viola. And it's so powerful when he's crying as Rebecca walking in the water, and then he's crying when he's in bed with her, and they're both ghosts. And that's the Romeo and Juliet-esque story with Rebecca and Peter. And Rebecca's tragic flaw here is that she was willing to go America with this guy, even when she knew he was a ghost. And she's like, I don't care if people see me talking as a ghost. And that was set up well again in Hannah's episode about her just blindly falling in love. It's truly a great ghost love story here, but Shakespearean with the tragedy. And that moment, how powerful it is when Rebecca realizes what's happening and it's too late and she's drowning and Peter just left. And I love we got to see the moment when Flora finds Rebecca dead in the water and you see afar Rebecca screaming, realizing what's happened and that she was betrayed by Peter and killed by Peter. And just incredible acting, like I said, by Oliver Jackson Cohen when he says to his mother, "I hope you know you killed your own son." And the moment I did feel for Peter, though, was when he actually talks to Miles in Current Time as a Ghost and says, basically, you can't be more rich than having two people who love you. Something he never had. It's crazy having Danny now watch them take over the kids' bodies. Huge reveal here for the audience. And that the play by Peter is them going in this dollhouse, and it's this forever house connecting to Haunting of Hill House. And I guess we can assume that Hugh Crane made this model. Please correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm sure there's a bunch of videos out about this and this connection if someone can elaborate in the comments below. And it's crazy that Peter was so frustrated. So he goes in Miles' body and he cannot stand that Hannah doesn't realize she was killed by him, and he actually points her to the well and looks down at it and realizes she's dead. It's so crazy. And Rebecca has an important line to hear where she sees she's still trying to help Flora and wasn't fully going with Peter's plan. I still don't understand why she let Miles kind of just take it, though. Because Danny's like, "Oh, what about Miles?" And she's like, "Ah, it's too late." That was strange. But Hannah says that line to Flora that no one should ever need that much help, talking about Peter. This directly correlates Peter to his mother and that he is like his mother in that regard of manipulative and sucking the light out of people to get what they want. So we get the crazy cliffhanger here that the lady in the lake grabs Danny's neck. This episode for me was a 9.6 and really brought up by, again, the great chemistry and acting by Rebecca and Peter here. Spook level still just a 3 though. Okay, so then episode 8 here is written by Lei Fong and directed by Axel Carolyn. This is the black and white episode. This was another thing that was really hidden in secret and they didn't want any press talking about before the show came out. And you're waiting and watching the show wondering who Mike Flanagan's wife, Kate Siegel, was going to play, aka Theo from Haunting of Hill House. And we get the reveal of another big actor in Mike Flanagan's work, in Katie Parker, who played Poppy Hill in Haunting of Hill House and has been in a lot of his movies. I didn't like the character of Poppy Hill. I thought that was the worst part of Haunting of Hill House, but Katie Parker gets to play a really good character here and kills it. And this is taking place in the 17th century. We're getting the backstory of Bly. I love they were in the paintings in the Bly Manor, and it's these sisters, Viola and Perdita. And it's a very similar story to the Wingrave story in a love triangle here. And you're replacing someone not being around with someone like Viola being sick. And Viola here was actually the first one to tuck and the first one to say this line, "It was you, it was me, it was us," to her baby. And it's cool. We get to see, like I said, the dollhouse ghosts we see here from Flora's house. Damn, the lung thing hit close to home, huh? With the face coverings now. Woo! It's so strange that shows filmed before Corona now. It's like you're seeing things with like face coverings and viruses. It's like hard to watch now, to be honest. But I found myself in the beginning of this episode zoning out a bit. This is where I think the PBS, BBC-esque narration didn't help and kind of made you sleepy, on top of it being black and white, which is cool, but you got to be careful. I feel like maybe, if they cut some of these scenes slowly into other episodes and slowly revealed the backstory, might have been better than a whole episode. Again, making the pacing feel strange for the whole season. And it feels like a very Netflix-esque decision to depend on the binge here to make it not feel as so just, whoa, like stopping from a cliffhanger to this. But the makeup and costumes were awesome here, especially on the decay of Viola. And it was crazy when Perdita kills Viola. And Viola was being not the best sister. And her problem, like Peter, was not letting go and not thinking the best for others, not thinking the best for her daughter, not accepting her own sickness and coming death, which we see Danny was able to. And then you see Arthur drained the family finances here, so Perdita's getting that lesson of hoes before bros. And he won't even sell Viola's stuff when they need money. Really kick in the face to Perdita, who chose him. And I love Perdita staring the picture of her sister Viola. And then goes up to the chest and gets killed by Viola. That was an awesome scare, and that felt like Haunting of Hill House scare. But what was so important was now Viola got her revenge on her sister, but sees how poorly it affected her husband and her daughter. And then she's in that chest and they throw it in the water. Viola's stubborn, won't let go. Like when she was sick, like Peter. And this makes her the Lady of the Lake and keeps coming up here now and reliving, thinking that her daughter's going to be in that bed, and fading memory, fading face, which was really effective and cool. And she started this trap now, trapping people blind to others, like that doctor. Now being that girl she thought was her daughter, trapped her there too. So you see, she just screwed everything up. And this one was a 9.1 for me still. And that goes up too, because this was the scariest episode for sure. Give it a spook level of 7 for that intense jump scare in the chest. So now let's go to the finale. I loved this finale where Haunting of Hill House's weakness was its finale. Bly Manor, it was one of its strengths. It hit it out of the park. This was written by Julia Bicknell and directed by Elle Katz. So this is where Hannah's really just realizing it now all, that she's with her own version of Owen here, telling him this is her favorite memory. Wish she told him she loved him. Wish she went away with him. But she's even like talking to herself as Owen, like, you can't just live in this happy memory. You need to help people in the real world here. And I love when she goes to help Danny, the Lady of the Lake, just walks through Hannah. It was our first time to really see her as a ghost, which was cool. I'm happy Henry actually finally came through to actually help and take care of Flora and Miles here. I loved when the Lady of the Lake thinks that Flora is her daughter, picks it up, and again we get to hear the creepy version of a Willow Whaley. I love that. But Danny, like Noah's, is the hero, the savior of the day by saving Flora by inviting Viola into herself. It's you, it's me, it's us. This line used the right way now and not for possession and manipulation like Viola and Peter would. And she gets this crazy one eye that's brown here. I thought that was really cool once Viola enters her. And you see, by her trapping the Lady in the Lake and herself, it releases all the ghosts from Bly. Really hit hard too when Owen realizes Hannah is dead in the well. And this really, when they go to Danny and Jamie now and it focuses on them, the two of them just act their butts off. I mean, this monologue Danny has about feeling rage inside of her, this person, this lonely beast, was so well done. And I love the writing where she's like, at some point she's going to take me, which we know will be the case. And that great line Jamie says, do you want company as you wait for the beast in the jungle? Showing this love here and that perfect partner for her and with her through the tough times. And I love the story of Jamie and Danny in America, living together happy and peaceful. Even though knowing there's an impending end coming, one day at a time. It's more than some of us ever get, she says. So again, you can look at this as just a view of illness, whether it's mental or just any kind of disease or sickness, knowing someone's on their way out and how to still embrace love and enjoy it. And then you see the one day Danny sees that reflection come back of Lady in the Lake. She proposes to her. I am man enough to admit that I cried this whole hour. And it's a different type of crying. It's not like at one big moment. It's like a consistent drip of a tear the whole episode. Get you in the feels. And it was just so powerful, her looking in the bathtub. This is like her end days here. And she knew it was time to go and she almost killed Jamie. Again, just showing the difference of Danny compared to Peter and Viola. Being selfless. And it just, oh my God, it was so good. Because when Jamie goes to Bly, you knew it was coming with Danny at the bottom of the lake. And her screaming was so powerful. And she's saying, take me. And I love the narration saying, but Danny wouldn't. Danny would never. And no one would ever be taken or has been to this day. So she's the cure to this Lady in the Lake and the curse on Bly Manor and keeps it down. And I love what they say, Danny's memories would fade, harmless as a dove walking through Bly, leaving the memories of who she once was in the woman who would love her the most, which is our narrator, revealed here. Which, that I did see a mile coming, again, because of the accent. They kind of gave you that one early. And that they say in the first episode she's someone in this story. So, obviously, she's the gardener. And you see the older Flora here says to Jamie, you set it up wrong. You said it was a ghost story. It's a love story. And Jamie has this great line, same thing really. Love this. And I again felt that strength of Hill House. Really good writing. Makes you think a lot too. And going back to this theme, talked about in this episode throughout the season, but this Flora now talking about how much she loves her husband and the terror of one day losing him. And then you see Jamie relates to this obviously because she's already there. And she's saying you still have a piece of them. And again, reiterate, they're not ghosts at this wedding. They are the real people that were in this story. What we saw in the story was just a different face, like you always hear in stories. You make your own head of somebody. That is them, but Flora and Miles don't know it's them because they don't remember what happened at Bly. They just know who their father is, but don't know any of the past circumstances. And probably know them as family friends and with different names. And it ties around to the opening scene of the season with the hand on the shoulder, her waiting at the door, Jamie for Danny, tying to the song A Willow Whaley, waiting for your love to come back. Excellent. Again, compared to Hill House, finale was 10 times better. I'm giving this finale a 9.8, spook level 6, because again, it's that psychological horror of your impending doom and losing someone you love. Oh man, so season as a whole. First, I'll give the scary level. It's a 4, which is incredibly disappointing because there was some not crazy scary stuff in Hill House, but It had its moments of terror and stuff that made me like jump up. This did not have that, which was a huge letdown. Now, I think you got to bring some points down for the season with, again, that clunker of an episode, Henry's episode, and a weak premiere, and the backstory of Danny just not being so great. And it's a season 2 following a masterpiece of a show. It's setting up now this franchise of The Haunting, and I think it's great for season 2. It's better than any follow-up of American Horror Story season 1. They could never get near that magic, and this gets near the magic of Hill House, so I appreciate it for that. It has its brilliance. I think the finale and Hannah's episodes where it really, really shined, and the acting is still amazing all around. I'm giving this a 9.2, but that goes up on second watch. I think a lot of people watching it the first time are going to be angry right now, disappointed, but gotta watch it again. It requires second viewing. And maybe that's a complaint, and that's a valid complaint. Maybe you don't want something that requires second viewing and that you should have just enjoyed it first time. But I think, with Flanagan, it takes a little more thinking and a little more layers to it, which I appreciate by him. And he still is incredibly skilled as a showrunner. And it makes me so excited for more of this. And I could actually say this has the upside to be one of the best franchise shows because so many shows drop off season 2. And to me, of course, it was going to drop off a little bit. It was never going to live up to Hill House, but it's still really damn good. Let me know down below what you thought of this season as a whole, any episodes, any thoughts you have, theories, things you want to explain, things you disagree, agree with. I'd love to hear it all. Please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss one of my reviews of movies and TV shows. I also do celebrity interviews, and I ask, if you like what I do here, I'd really appreciate a small donation of $2 a month. You can sign up in the PayPal link in my description. It will give me the opening to do this full time and give you guys more videos. So I'd really appreciate anything I could get. And please follow me at Steve Varley Show on Twitter and Instagram for more of me. And I'll see you next time.